The rest of the story. Abby was at home in Buffalo, New York, when she received the exciting news from her husband they were moving into the house of their dreams. And then Abby rushed to meet him and unhappily learned the rest of the story. Her husband's dream house was a nightmare. No gas and no plumbing. Not so much as a bathtub. No bathtub. The previous residents had been cooking over a kitchen fireplace, and the rest of the place was woefully inadequately heated. Couldn't they simply go back home to Buffalo and forget the whole thing, Abby wondered. But it was too late for that. Her husband had already committed them to this dismal property, and there they would stay. He never actually came out and called the move a mistake, as far as we know. However, he readily acknowledged that there were difficult times ahead. He began referring to the new homestead as this temple of inconveniences. Here's part of a letter that he wrote to a friend. Quote, "The busy week is nearly ended, and I seize this precious moment simply to say that I'm very anxious that you and Mrs. Haven should come and make us a visit this winter. We have one spare room in this temple of inconveniences, neatly fitted up, just the thing for you and Mrs. H. The difficulty was that one spare room was just about the only room in the house that was neatly fitted up. The more Abby thought about it, the more upset she became. She remembered having to carry bathing water into her house in the old days, but that was precisely the point. These were not the old days. Why, then, should her family be subjected to such primitive living conditions? A house, after all, in which there was not even an indoor tub to which water might be carried. Well, that's how it was that this spunky former school teacher decided to make a few significant changes on her own. It was Abby who ordered the workmen to install the gas pipes and the water pipes. It was Abby who supervised the installations of the kitchen range and a big bathtub, and she did not stop there. There were no books in the house, not even a dictionary, not even a Bible. So Abby, from nothing, began building a library, and her first selections included Hawthorne's Great Stone Face and The Scarlet Letter and Bryant's Thanatopsis and Emerson's Essays. Then Abby began replacing worn furniture and carpets. And she bought a piano. And she bought a harp. And she threw a big party to celebrate. And the big house sparkled, and it sang, and it laughed as it never had before. Every word of what you've just heard is history. What remains is one mystery. The neighbors objected. The neighbors talked and tisked. A bathtub, they declared. Indeed, what an extravagance. And books, of all things. And I wonder how Abigail Fillmore felt, faced with the public outcry that she and her husband Millard, the President of the United States, should represent the nation's people living in a cold, threadbare, cheerless home called the White House. That's right. That is the rest of the story.
And now the rest of the story. In addition to being at its core a residence and office, the White House is a symbol of ever-changing leadership of the free world, a symbol of democracy. The White House has been known by several names, including the President's Palace, the President's House, the Executive Mansion, and, as Mr. Harvey explained, my favorite, the Temple of Inconveniences. The building where the President lives was not formally known as the White House during Millard Fillmore's presidency. The earliest known reference to the Executive Mansion as the White House, that's with a lowercase w and h, by the public was recorded in 1811, but most people refer to it as either the President's House or the Executive Mansion. There's a popular misconception that the White House was first painted white to cover the burn marks left by the British soldiers who burned the house on August 24, 1814, during the War of 1812. You see, 14 years earlier, 1798, the White House was painted with a lime-based whitewash to protect its sandstone exterior from moisture and cracking during winter freezes. The site for the White House was selected by George Washington in 1791. The cornerstone was laid the following years. 8 years later, in November 1800, President John Adams and his wife Abigail moved into the still unfinished and largely unfurnished house. The house was not ready because of the immense demand for domestic goods in the city with all the new government arrivals. Imported goods would not arrive until the spring. During that winter, Abigail kept warm by keeping the doors closed to her room and staying close to the fireplace. The house had insufficient lamps to light the house, the roof leaked, and Abigail hung their laundry to dry in the unfinished east room because there was no fence around the White House to protect their clothing. John and Abigail Adams lived in the White House just 5 months before the new president, Thomas Jefferson, moved in. In 1850, 49 years after Thomas Jefferson moved into the White House, Millard Fillmore became president upon the death of President Zachary Taylor. As Mr. Harvey explained, it was another Abigail who transformed the White House into a more livable space, Abigail Fillmore. Abigail Fillmore had a difficult time doing all the things expected of a First Lady because of an old injury which never properly healed. On July 4, 1842, Independence Day, Abigail Fillmore was walking on an uneven sidewalk, slipped, and twisted her ankle. She was unable to put pressure on her ankle for about 2 weeks. Walking was horribly painful for Abigail, and for years she mostly had to use crutches to walk. Her ankle never fully healed, and she struggled with foot pain for the remainder of her short life. On Friday, March 4, 1853, Abigail and Millard Fillmore attended the outdoor inauguration for her husband's successor, incoming President Franklin Pierce. He inherited the house that Abigail had upgraded. But a northeast wind whipped snow over the shivering crowd. Following the inauguration, Abigail and Millard returned to their room at the Willard Hotel. Abigail had a slight fever and chills. On March 6th, she was diagnosed as having bronchial inflammation of the lungs, which eventually led to pneumonia. On March 30th, 1853, just 3 weeks after leaving the White House, 55-year-old Abigail Powers Fillmore died. In 1901, 48 years after Millard Fillmore left office, Theodore Teddy Roosevelt became president after the assassination of President William McKinley. On October 17, 1901, a little over a month after McKinley's death, President Roosevelt had his staff change the headings of all official papers and documents requiring his signature from Executive Mansion to White House. Now, for over 120 years, people have speculated about the reason Teddy Roosevelt changed the name to the White House. Some people believe it was simply due to it being a house that was painted white, while others contended that there's some deeper meaning to the name change. It's hard to imagine in this, what we call the land of plenty, that having a bathtub could be considered extravagant. It must have been considered extravagant when Abigail Adams hung her laundry indoors. Paralyzed from the waist down due to polio, Franklin Roosevelt had a swimming pool built in the White House. He used the pool to exercise his legs. It was during the Roosevelt presidency that the White House became one of the first wheelchair-accessible government buildings in Washington, D.C. A single-lane bowling alley was built in the White House basement during Richard Nixon's presidency. Jimmy Carter had a set of solar water heating panels mounted to the roof of the White House. The White House now includes a movie theater, swimming pool, spa, solar panels for electricity, a jogging track, tennis court, and a putting green. There are 132 rooms in the White House complex. It has 35 bathrooms and 6 levels in the residence. There are 412 doors, 147 windows, 28 fireplaces, 8 staircases, 3 elevators, and 5 full-time chefs. It takes a whopping 570 gallons of paint to keep the White House white. In addition to being the residence and office of the President, the White House is a museum. One day I would like to take that tour. Have you ever been inside the White House? I'm Brad Dison. Thank you for watching, and as Paul Harvey would say, good day.